Welcome to Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. This is where we get to speak with the brilliant and creative people and kooky people who make the greatest coming attractions, movie posters, and digital campaigns of all time. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Golden Trailer Awards. It was so cool to get that, what do they call it? The Christmas sweaters, the ugly Christmas sweaters.
Yes.
It was awesome. Um, Very, very creative Christmas present. One of my favorites ever. We're also brought to you by Brent Allen Hagel. You know him as Trailer VO Brent. And by Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes presents Seen on the Screen, a great series that they're sharing. I'm also grateful to all the folks who help bring this entire show to you. I'm grateful to you, our listeners. It's a privilege to get to share these conversations with you. Today, we are joined by one of the true original rock stars of the trailer industry, the owner and co-founder of Rebel, Benedict Coulter. Benny, so good to be with you. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you, Corey?
I am doing great. This is long in the making. I've been wanting to talk to you for quite some time on this show.
Yes.
We've been pals for quite a while. You were one of my first clients when you were working with Tim at Trailer Park. But I'd like to go way back, actually, in sort of a full circle way. I'd love to ask you about your father, because in a way, you've come full circle and have charted a whole new chapter like your dad as an author.
Yeah. It's interesting how we end up going full circle in life sometimes. My father was a journalist. He was English, and he was a journalist for the London Sunday Times. And then at some point in his career, he started writing books. Um, and at some point, he got successful with his book. So our lifestyle improved pretty dramatically halfway through his life. But he was also a very challenging father. He was an alcoholic, which kind of set a lot of paths in my life that I had to deal with. But funnily enough, when I started writing a few years ago, it was interesting that I thought, wow, my God, here I am following in his path, and he would probably be smiling, up in heaven, going, "Wow, you're doing it."
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the notes that you shared happened pretty early, and I don't want to skip over the music part of your career. So I want to make sure to get to that. But you did share a note when we were prepping for this conversation.
Mhm.
You were talking about the summer of 1977. It was very early in your career, in your time at Kaleidoscope. You said you worked. Kaleidoscope worked on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The producer, Julia Phillips, introduced the company to cocaine. It changed everything. So I
Yeah.
know that that's an important part of the story, because an important part of your story is that you've been sober, I want to say, since 1992. Do I have that right?
1988.
1988. Okay, even
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
Right.
36 years.
So that those years, could you expound on that? That you say
Well,
it changed everything.
Kaleidoscope was a pretty traditional company. I had just started there in March of '77. So when Julia Phillips came over, and I think she came over in the summer of '77. Kaleidoscope was a pretty normal company. I mean, Andy smoked pot, and a lot of people smoked pot, and there was some drinking, but it was pretty average amongst all the other companies. And Julia Phillips came over. There was another guy called Mike Shapiro who ran a small company within Kaleidoscope called Saraband, and that was his account. And she came over, and I remember there was a guy who came with her. I think it was Tony or something. And as they started the meeting, Tony pulled out a rock from his attache case. And, both Mike and Andy had maybe dabbled with cocaine, but I don't think they ever would. And let me tell you something, Corey, from that day on, you could drive by Kaleidoscope at 4 o'clock in the morning, all the lights were on, everybody was working, everybody was getting high.
Mm.
And, listen, in all fairness, in the 80s, cocaine was in the budgets of movies. I remember uh, when I was working on the very first Star Trek, uh, Dykstra, and then this other guy had this other special effects company. Uh, it was in their budgets that they had to render all these special effects for the movie. They were up all night. They were up all weekend.
Mm.
So it was rampant. To me personally, I had already had some issues in early on in my life in Paris, and it was like I just kind of dove right back into it. So, having been an owner now for many, many years of different companies, I certainly imagine how hard it must have been for Steve and Andy to deal with all of us because it was madness.
Yeah. How hard? So 1988. Now I thought 1992 for some reason because that was right about the time that you changed. Maybe that was a little earlier, but 1988 you were still at Kaleidoscope. How hard was it for you to get sober when a lot of the rest of your vocational and a lot of the rest of your life was still the same?
Well, listen, I ran out of road, as they say, right? It
Mm.
was like, and I was in the middle of huge campaign. I was in the middle of U2 Rattle and Hum and Beverly Hills Cop 2, and I forgot what else I was working on. But I basically ran out of road. It was like, okay, I cannot do this anymore. And a very good friend of mine kind of convinced me to go into Cedars for the weekend. And I thought I was going in for the weekend. Well, I ended up going for a month. There was
Wow.
the program was a 28-day program, but he kind of lured me into doing it. Um, and I think the biggest thing and probably why it took so long for me to get there was that I really thought that all my inspiration came from the cocktail that I was using on a daily basis. When I was nice and high, I was ready to cut.
Hmm.
And I was petrified that if I didn't have that, maybe I wouldn't have any creativity. But I found out once I got out and I got sober that, of course, the creativity is inside you. It doesn't go away. And I was actually much more able to tap into it,
Oh,
with all
that's
these.
encouraging. That's
Yeah.
super encouraging. Now,
Yeah.
I do want to go back to your time. How young were you when you started playing music?
Oh, I was in my teens. I was in high school. Um, I had a band in Paris in high school, in junior high school. I just started playing, and we played in different high schools. Um, and then there was a guy who went to high school with, my best friend Renaud, who's a
Kind of a
legend.
big deal. He became kind of a big
Well,
deal.
he's the Bruce Springsteen of France. He's a legendary. He just finished a 2-year tour. Him and I were best friends in high school, and we used to go and play after school in the cafe terraces in Paris. The son of the owner of the cafe we went to played the accordion, so he came with us, and we played around town and made a little extra money, pass the hat, and make some extra money after school, and had a great time. And he was writing really cool songs. And then, one day we did there were people standing in line for a show for a very famous stand-up comedian. And so we were playing that line, just going up and down the line. And there was a very famous manager who saw us and said, "Hey, you kids are great. Come and see me on Monday in my office." And we went that following Monday, and he signed us up to be the opening act for that guy in a new venue that he had just opened on the Champs-Élysées, which was like the place to be. So we went from playing, outside at cafes to we were the opening act of this very famous guy. Um, and it was great. It was kind of my first taste of success and a little bit of fame. And, it was very exciting times. And that summer, I met a guy who had just signed a contract, a deal with a band in LA with incredible musician, Rick Gretsch, Carmen Appice, Mike Bloomfield, just these legendary musicians. And he said, "Won't you come to LA and join the band?" And ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to live in the States.
Mm.
There was a store in Paris that I would go to that sold American boots and American, cowboy shirts, and I bought everything. I was just like, so when the opportunity came, I jumped on it and I came over here in the summer of 76.
Wow.
That summer, as I left, my friend recorded his first album, which went triple platinum. and he became this just legendary singer.
Nothing like timing, right?
Oh, so I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed, but I think that was him anyway, him alone. That was his journey. And I don't look back on things that I chose or I did as maybe I should have done this. It's just that was what the journey was supposed to be.
Yeah. But you did play in LA, didn't you? You had a band that
Oh
you were a part
yeah,
of. Yeah.
yeah. So when I got here, I think. No, we all have dreams as little boys of like, I imagine yourself either, at bat somewhere or, just throwing the touchdown or whatever. For me, it was I'd love to be on stage, in LA and I found myself, they were really cool places in LA to play. There was a place called the Starwood, which was at the corner of Santa Monica Boulevard and Crescent Heights.
Oh,
Mm. And I got, so I had for almost a year, I had the experience of living that dream, being on stage with very famous musicians. I mean, I remember one night at the Starwood, we had the Runaways opening for us, was Joan Jett and Lita Ford. They were our opening act.
wow.
Rick Derringer was our opening act. So it was like, oh, it's fantastic. And I ended up playing with some pretty famous musicians. And then, I play by ear. I can't read or write music. So when eventually the band split up and there was no gig, all the guys I knew played, went to studios and did recordings. I couldn't read music, so I couldn't do it. So I was determined not to go back to France. That was like I had come here and there was no going back. So I got a job at Turner's Liquor Store on Sunset.
Wow.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes presents Scene on the Screen, a bi-weekly podcast that takes listeners behind the scenes at NBC Universal, offering an intimate look at how film and storytelling have impacted the lives of its employees and creative community. Hosted by Jacqueline Coley, journalist and awards editor at Rotten Tomatoes, the series is home to vibrant conversations blending humor, introspection, and unforgettable anecdotes, and a bit of trivia. Jacqueline sets the tone for the show. As an established authority in entertainment, she brings warmth, curiosity, and insight into every episode, exploring film's ability to connect and transform. Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes presents Scene on the Screen is available to you on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So that was one of the chapters I was curious about. It was a brief chapter, but a lot of younger creatives listen to the program. I'd love to learn how a little bit more about how hard it was and what your mindset was like during that time after you were in a rock and roll band, but before you really started finding success as a trailer editor.
Oh, listen, that was a very confusing time and it was a very daunting time for me because I had come here to be a musician and I really believed that that was going to be my life for the rest of my life. I was going to be a professional musician. And so when that rug was pulled under and I ended up, working in a liquor store, deliveries, groceries, I said, what the fuck am I doing?
Right.
But I had also that mindset that I was going to stay here and do what it took to figure out what I was going to do. And sure enough, if you have a bit of faith and stick to what you believe in, uh, I was told of a job at a trailer company, and I didn't know what a trailer was. I had
Yeah.
not really a big movie goer when I was growing up, so um, this was a totally foreign world. But somebody told me you should go and interview with this place. It's a trailer company, they do trailers for movies, and they're looking for a messenger. And so I went, and I remember I interviewed with Jeff Smith and
Oh,
Vince Argero. And Jeff Smith was the finishing guy at Kaleidoscope Films. And his office was at the very end of the hallway. And I remember, because this is one of those moments where, people say something happened. Do you remember where you were? Or do you remember what happened in you? And I remember when I walked down that hallway, there was a vibe, there was a creative vibe that engulfed me. And as I was walking by the open doors of the editing rooms, I could hear the sound, but I also somehow could feel the creativity. I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is interesting. And I went and met with Jeff, and I got the job.
Yeah.
So I started, getting sandwiches and delivering, tapes, film at the time at the studios.
Right, right. Now it's easy to look through the rearview mirror and say, "Oh, these are the guys that, worked on Jaws and worked on Star Wars and Jeff Smith, having been a photographer for some of the most legendary albums of all time, rock and roll albums of all time." So it's easy to look through the rearview mirror and say there was a lot of creativity there, but for a kid that was struggling to like find footing, it must have been I don't know what was it a spidey sense? Like what did you recognize when you walked down that hall?
I just sensed the creativity. It looked like I remember you said you when you walk into some places you can sense the vibe, right? And
It's
some
like a mist. Yeah.
you go to different trailer companies, you get somewhere and goes, wow, this is a really cool place. They
Yeah.
got their shit together. And other places are not as comfortable. This was just so inviting. The people looked very friendly, but there was something inside me, and the sound and the sounds from the rooms. But at first I had no idea what they were doing
Yeah.
until I started looking, going to an editing room and kind of watching. And there was an older guy, God bless him. I don't know if he's still alive. His name is Bill Cox. He was an old union editor. Um, and, this is where I think this is one of the most important things when you get into a business or you want to get into something is you start showing interest in what they're doing. Well, he could see that I was interested in what he was doing, and he took me under his wing and started showing me stuff. Here, kid, come here. I'll show you. See how you do this, and we're on film, and he was showing me just how he was preparing things, how he was picking dialogue and music, etc. And like, it really piqued my interest. I thought, okay, this is really interesting.
So how did you get from, getting sandwiches and being the messenger to actually being able to cut? Like cutting was kind of a big deal. It
Yeah.
wasn't like you could hop on a Mac and start working on Premiere. Like it was like it was a big flatbed machine. Like it was a big deal. How did you get
Oh
from here to
yeah,
there?
because I mean, they usually only had one machine in the room. There was a flatbed to look for footage, and there was an upright moviola to cut on. So it's not like you could grab another machine and start cutting. But at the time, because it was on film, everybody had one assistant and usually one apprentice. So
Mm,
there were two or three guys in the room, and you could stand there and watch, right? And during between my runs, I would go in and I'd watch. And you're right. This was like at the time of Kaleidoscope had just done Jaws, and it was just like incredibly cool stuff being cut there. So I watched and I watched and I watched, and then Bill said, why don't you try something here? Well, here, kid, uh, go on this bench and make a selection
yeah.
and see, and let's see what you come up with. And he guided me, he showed me, okay, no, that's not the thing. Put that there. Um, but the ascension from runner to editor took quite a long time. I was a runner for probably a year and a half. I became a projectionist because we had a screening room at Kaleidoscope. So you had to learn how to, run the projection room. Um, but every time, this is so important for everybody who wants to learn this. It's like every minute I had, I was in the cutting room watching, learning, trying, right? Um, and slowly but surely, eventually, the guy showed me, he helped me put the first piece together. And it was clanky, and but it was I had to learn how to assemble something, and I loved it. I loved the process. And I started thinking, oh, I have another idea. I
Mm,
try this, try that. Well, he's very conventional, so he was not at all. my speed of, my desire to explore artistically. It was much more very traditional. Um, but one of the things that happened for me was that I realized quickly that my extreme love for music, my passion for music was going to come in really handy. Um, and as I started cutting, just little things here and there first, um, I started really using music much more unconventionally than everybody else did. At the
Right.
time, during those years, trailers were scored with scores from previous mu movies from the same studio because they could license the score.
Right.
So, and it was all traditional movie scores. Um, I started looking for different stuff. So there was a room downstairs that was filled with quarter-inch tapes with scores from all different movies. And you would go through it and then you would transfer 35 and then you put it on your machine and work with it. But what we could also do is we could also go to Tower Records and listen to albums and find cuts, find songs. So I started doing that. And I don't remember the very first thing that I cut on my own, but it had a different piece of music. And Andy, who was the owner of Kaleidoscope, who was my mentor, who was
Andy Keene, yeah.
Andy Keene, who was, he is the father of trailer. He's the one who invented the trailer business. He was working at MGM and then started his own company. Was my mentor, and one of the wonderful things about Andy is he was very supportive of artistic exploration. He never said, no, don't do that. He's like, well, yeah, cool, try this. Um, so I got I got somebody's attention like, wow, this is interesting. This kid's got some good ideas. And so that was the beginning for me. I started um, cutting spots. I was Tom Kennedy's assistant
Oh,
for probably, I think, a couple of years. Listen, so I was Jan Bronco. I don't know if you ever heard of
yeah,
Jan.
I remember Jan,
Jan
sure.
Bronco was legendary editor, incredible editor, who cut some of the most amazing trailers. And I worked for her for a year, I think, and then I was moved up to Tom Kennedy, who was quite an adventure. Um, and there was really something interesting that again, somebody did something for me, right? Somebody helped me. So I would work with Tom and I'd watch him and we were just going nonstop. And when we'd get to the TV campaign, he would cut spots on the moviola and he'd say, all right, won't you cut one? So I
Mm.
cut one. And when it came time to present to Steve Panama, he would show his spots and say, yeah, there's a spot from Benny. And Panama go, yeah, no, it's not good. Right. So it was dismissed because it was not Tom's, right?
Right.
Then Tom came up with a great idea, said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put your spot in third position and not tell whose spots it is. So we run the spots on the move your life, and Panama goes, wow, that's a great spot. And Tom goes, that's Benny's. So he helped me get the exposure, that I probably might not have gotten without him. But Corey, once I started getting a taste of this, as you've heard many people say, I was there until 4 o'clock in the morning, cutting
Yeah.
on my own. Like, I'm going to cut this, I'm going to cut that, I'm going to do this. And here, let me show you. Like, they probably looked at me like, Jesus Christ, he's going to what's another thing. But I got a taste of how great it felt. And I got that passion.
Right. Yeah. And as you said, your life as a musician informed your creative in a way that brought a new dimension to the work. So that's interesting. As you were screening, I would imagine that as you were screening movies, before you started cutting, you were imagining, maybe hearing things in your imagination that you could play with. How hard was it to execute? Because the tools weren't necessarily there for you to really rock out, if you will.
Well, we didn't know any different. So when Uh, my young interns were at Rebel this summer and they walked in the office and saw the moviola. It looked like a horse and carriage to them. Like, how could you possibly do anything on this thing? But to us, that's all, that's how you did it.
Yeah.
So it was not complicated. As far as the music was concerned, you had one track. There was no stems. We had to work with that one track. I had a three sound-headed moviola. I had, dialogue and effects on one track, narration on two, music on three. So very different choices, very not the opportunity to kind of, fade and do things to music like we can now.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but even now to this day, and I'm cutting on a big, big movie right now. First thing I always look for was music.
Mm.
Music is like essential. So my knowledge of music, my knowledge of rhythm, my knowledge of because I feel, a trailer has certainly acts like songs do, and rhythms. Even trailers who are not musically driven are still rhythmically driven, if it's just dialogue.
Yeah, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I love that story about the Beverly Hills Cop trailer. You
Mhm.
found the Pointer Sisters cue. It wasn't until like the end credits or something that.
Well, I had to, my bosses came to me. This is 1984. So I'd been
Okay.
cutting. Um, my bosses came to me on a Friday night and said, "Hey, Benedict, are you available this weekend? Because we need to cut a trail in Beverly Hills Cop. We have one that's not really working. And Simpson and Brockheimer are coming Sunday night to look at the trailer. So we're fucked. Can you help us?" And I said, "Sure, I'll come in over the weekend." And so, as we said earlier, the routine for us was when you prepared to cut your trailer, you look for music. So you went down to the sound room or you went to Tower Records and picked some music to cut to. But I was not going to have that time because it was Saturday and I had to cut the thing. But as I was going through the movies usually came, there were 12 reels, picture and sound, for a full feature. And as I got to the last reel was for the end credits, and there was the mag of Neutron Dance.
Mm.
And I listened to it and I thought, wow, this song is perfect. It's cool. It's got great vibe. It's got great energy. I don't have to look for music. I'll cut it to this. And so I actually cut that trailer in literally a day. It
Wow.
was one of those that kind of came together easily. Like, it was just like not hard. Um, and Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson came that Sunday at the end of the day and loved it.
Now, did you have to tailor the song for the trailer's purposes, or were you able to use that cue pretty much as is
No,
and then cut?
I used that cue as is.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
there was no tailoring, Corey. There was no. This is before time of composers that were able to take cues and decompose them and add drums and strings. This is what you had was that was it.
That was it.
And it's like as I was talking to somebody about music stops and things to music, and I said, you have to understand when we were cutting on film. Basically, that piece of music was that piece of music, and we had to figure out where to fit the dialogue between the lyrics of the song, and because that thing came on again, and um, that was it.
Yeah. Now, when I went back to watch the Ferris Bueller trailer, I was
Mm,
surprised at how restrained your choices were for that one because you did find a music cue, but it was all like I felt like it was Ferris Bueller does a Grey Poupon commercial. You know what
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean?
But that was so much fun. It has been so much fun
Yeah.
to me is to be able to use really a variety of music and to come up with the unexpected when you think, there's a couple of trails that we did where you would have gone naturally with a certain cue. And I said, let's go completely different.
Yeah.
Blew people away. I said, wow, I would have never thought of that cue. And that's brilliant. And that's different. And filmmakers go, wow, how did you pick that? So I love the variety of music that I like to go all over the place with music, not just, what you might expect. Yeah, it was very traditional. But it was perfect for that piece.
Yeah. I am so excited to share with you that Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is now brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards. Having just celebrated a wonderful GTA 24, there are many exciting developments we'll be able to share over the next year, including a documentary about the trailer industry that Monica Brady and Evelyn Brady Waters are producing. They shared a little bit more about that when they came on the show a couple weeks ago. They're producing it, and there's plenty of other news about the World Trailer Awards and much more. I'm just thrilled to be collaborating with such wonderful people like Monica and Evie, and I'm grateful for their support in bringing this program to you. Just make sure to stay plugged in at goldentrailer.com for all these exciting developments. That's goldentrailer.com. And now, on to our show. One of the things that you mentioned your longtime relationship with Bruckheimer. Was Spielberg the first big filmmaker that you developed a relationship with?
Um, yeah, I mean, Spielberg discovered me at very early on in my career. It's funny because I had been cutting already quite not that much, but quite a bit. And I had gone to Steve Panama for a raise. There were three categories in the union. Kaleidoscope was a union shop. And so you were either apprentice, assistant, or editor. An apprentice was 360 a week, assistant was 550 a week. And I forgot, all the editor was like 1200 or 1300. And I had been cutting for apprentice rate. And I said to Steve, I've been cutting. I would love to be bumped up to at least assistant scale. And he said, no, 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 you're not quite ready. Not quite yet. And I had been helping a friend of mine um, who was a cinematographer who's won quite a few Academy Awards. His name's John Toll. And he had shot a video for somebody, like it's Days of Rock videos. And he asked me if I could cut it, and I said I'd cut it. And then he contacted me and he said, "Hey, man, um, I'm working on a movie called Boy's Life, and I'm doing second unit photography. And the producer, Kathy Kennedy, just got approved by Universal to shoot behind the scenes on 35, which was unheard of. Nobody shot on 35, it's too expensive. But they wanted to shoot 35 so that when you went from the feature to the documentary footage, you can tell the difference. And since he was second unit on the movie, he knew exactly the look. Kaleidoscope at the time did a lot of behind the scenes, little documentaries. So he said, since you know what to do, can you tell me? Because I don't really know what to shoot. Now I've been assigned to this job. I'm shooting the documentary. And I said, well, you shoot them shooting the scene. You interview the actors. You interview the director. And he said to me, well, okay, he started shooting. And he said, so while so again, this was on film, 35, so it was picture and track. And
Yeah.
you had to sync up the dailies. And he asked me if I would help. And I said, sure, absolutely. I'd be glad to help. And I would go on weekends, Corey, to where the Amazon headquarters are at the Laird Studio in Culver City.
Right.
And in little those beautiful white bungalows. And I, sunk up the dailies, organized them, labeled them, put them in boxes. And then one day, John said, can you come on the set? Just help me out with this. And so I ended up going on the set. And I'm on the set of the movie, and I walk in, and it's Steven Spielberg. And the movie's title is changed from A Boy's Life to E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And
Wow.
I don't meet Steven. I'm in the back. I'm just watching, going, wow, this is insane. And I continue putting the footage together and organizing everything. And then the movie wrapped. And as with most movies, when they wrap, they have a wrap party where the filmmakers thank the actors and all the crew for the good work, and they have a party. And we had all this footage I had put together, but I had sunk up. And John and I decided to make a little gag reel. Um, and like on Halloween, Stephen kept dressed up in drag, and there was a lot of moments, funny moments, like that made a fun reel. And so we cut this reel, and the wrap party was at the Hollywood Athletic Club on Sunset Boulevard.
Oh yeah.
Steven goes up and he says, "Thank you, everybody. Great job. And it was wonderful. And apparently, we have a little reel to show. We had rented a projector and we played the reel. And Steven went nuts. And he said, "Who did this? Who did this? It's brilliant." And John said, "This is Benedict, who's been syncing up the dailies." And Steven said, "Well, you're coming to work with us next week. You're on, and I said I was working for Kaleidoscope, and they said, we'll talk to them. And eventually, Kaleidoscope agreed to loan me out for a year. I
That's
was
great.
loaned out to Mr. Spielberg. And I literally went from my little editing room at Kaleidoscope to Steven Spielberg apartment in Marina Del Rey on Palawan Way. Steven, like a lot of directors do now, wanted to edit the movie out of his place. So the editor, Carol Littleton, was in the master bedroom. The assistants were in the dining room and the living room, and I was in the second bedroom. And I spent pretty much close to a year working with Steven, and Steven, the first reel I had to put together, I think I was preparing the documentary and getting things ready, and he came to me and said, "Hey, Benedict, the studios drive me crazy. They want to see something. I don't want to really show them. Use some of your documentary footage and then put a few shots, but silhouette shots, not, I don't want to see what ET looks like." So when it's literally at night when Carol went home, I was pulling shots out of the movie, send them to the lab to make a dupe, put it back in the movie. Um, and I, put the first presentation together. And I found myself, one Friday night, I'm like just about to leave, and the phone rings, and it's Steven. He goes, "Hey, how's that reel coming?" And I said, "Oh, I think it's pretty much done." "Great, I'm on my way." And it was one of those where it was, I was sweating, I was shaking. I thought, "Oh my God, here I am going to be all alone with Steven Spielberg,
Right.
showing him my cut. I'm not showing it to Steve Panama or to, Bill Cox, or I'm showing it to Steven Spielberg." And he came in and he was great. I think he changed one shot. He said he loved it. And that was the beginning of a relationship that lasted, that has lasted since then.
So I was going to ask you about that moment. I was imagining that the first, the when you're in the room with somebody like that, and he was already a big deal,
Oh yeah, yeah. He had already done Jaws, and he was huge.
How do you maintain your composure?
Well, it's funny because this has happened to me so many times with so many of these giant, filmmakers and musicians. Um, I was very scared, but Stephen was very nice. Stephen was very cool, and then this is one of the things that to this day, Stephen is a gentleman, and so is Kathy. That whole group, although it's Frank Marshall, Kathy Kennedy, Steven Spielberg, are the nicest people I have ever worked with, and still are after all that success. They'll answer an email within a day. They never got this big ego. So I was really scared when my hand was shaking when I was trying to turn the thing to show him. Like I was really frozen. But I could see as he was watching it, he was getting into it. When we stopped, I was like, there was that it probably was 5 seconds that felt like a half hour, like waiting for what he was going to say.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, it's great, and I love your music choices. What is that music?" And I think the first thing was Howard Hanson's Romantic Symphony. Again, there's my love music and my knowledge of music. I picked stuff that he found interesting. And so right away, that tension and that fear went away because I was already collaborating with him. And one thing, and I told this to somebody recently, one thing that I learned working with Steven, who's on top of it knows everything about movie making. He knows editing, he knows how to run a camera. He's like, you can't bullshit him. Um, what I learned from him was to basically get the conviction of my edit. I don't know about that shot. Why is that there? And I would say, well, I put it there because of that, because that set up this. Oh, okay. So uh, the collaboration was very fast. So the fear went away.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I was curious if you have other. So it sounds like just do the best job that you possibly can. You're probably not going to be in that room in the first place if you're completely unprepared for it. So once you find yourself there, just do your best to kick ass at your job and you'll be okay.
Yeah, but I'll tell you something, because I remember when I owned Trailer Park, a lot of the editors said, I want to work on, I want to work on a Spielberg movie. Everybody wants to work on a Spielberg
Yeah,
movie, of
yeah.
course, right? And I would tell them, listen, I'm going to tell you something. You can, of course, you can work on a Spielberg movie. But all I'm going to tell you is you better give it 1,000%, everything you have, because that guy lives and breathes movies, right?
Yeah.
That's his entire life. And if he senses for half a second that you're not as committed as he is, he'll dump you.
Yeah.
So I think that was also, you know, you get these opportunities, man, you got to do everything that you can possibly think of.
So I don't know if I've ever told this story on the show before. It's a someone that we know very well. You actually worked for this person. I don't need to mention the person's name, but they were my first studio client, a mini major studio, a brother. You probably guess who I'm talking about.
Mhm.
And I was sort of when you as a headhunter when you get jobs like that all of a sudden out of nowhere, people are pinging you, calling you, emailing you. You should set me up with so and so. I'm like, and a lot of times I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I have a pretty good sense of who belongs in that room and who doesn't. One time, I let somebody talk me into getting him an interview with these guys, and it was the worst one of the worst calls I ever got from this particular client, and they have a reputation for being really nasty.
Mhm.
And he didn't even tell me who it was. It wasn't even his assistant said, so and so is on the phone. It was just him calling me directly. He said, Corey, I'm never going to want to have to tell you this ever again. He goes, that guy doesn't belong in the same room with me. And he hung up the phone and that was it. It was a good lesson. Like when you've worked so hard to get to a certain point, you really do belong in that room. Just do your best to stay there and don't fuck it up. Right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So was Empire First Strikes Back, that was your first big trailer for it. Was that before or after this whole experience with Spielberg?
This was before.
Oh,
I had done a few trailers. I think I had already done an Officer and Gentleman. I had done already a few, pretty decent size trailers. And there was a guy there. His name was Jim Doherty. He was Andy Keane's nephew. And we called him Dracula because he only worked at night. He came in at night. And I think he was definitely, I don't know what he was on, but it was definitely, he was a weird guy, right? But extremely talented. And he was cutting the teaser for The Empire Strikes Back.
okay.
And all of a sudden he disappeared. He was just missing in action. And Andy came to me and said, listen, I need you to jump on Empire Strikes Back. Holy shit. Oh, that little movie. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I looked at what Jim had put together,
Yeah.
his first cut, and I just I had a kind of a wild idea. I said I want to do something different. So I dumped all the voiceover, I dumped all the dialogue, and I said, Star Wars was the biggest hit. Let's just do a musical piece. Let's do a piece that's just with that beautiful John Williams score. He had already kind of contacted an effects company, and there was like these really interesting tiles.
Yeah, those car it's like the characters came up. I was curious
Yeah,
about
and there were
that.
tiles, like and so
Yeah.
he that was his idea, and I picked up on it and kind of added some stuff to it. So there was really interesting motion to
So
it.
so so hold on. The effects house did that effect, that tiling effect.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, and then you
yeah.
worked it into your piece.
It worked in the piece. So that was instead of saying Harrison Ford, we just it was more visually more interested.
Yeah.
And again, to Andy's credit for his incredible creativity, he looked at it. He didn't say, "Well, where's all this stuff?" He said, wow, that's fucking cool.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And that is a teaser. Like, we're just giving you a taste. You know the movie because you've seen the first one. We're giving you, we've seen some new characters. You've seen, and he sold it to the studio, and they bought it. And to their credit, they went along with it. And I think that was one of my first time I really felt like I had won, a creative battle. That like, okay, there's something really interesting that happens with editors, Corey. And I've observed this, starting with Nick Temple when he worked for me at Trailer Park. Editors at first cut for their boss, right? And they're just making cuts that they hope their boss likes. And then once they get into a little bit of success and the stuff is going out to the studio, they're cutting for the guy at the studio. And I'm going to put that shot because I know Joe likes that shot. And I'm going to put this, and they're constructing something to please the client, not really kind of doing what they would dare to do. But after they've had 3 or 4 or 5 finishes, big finishes, they start to gain that confidence, like, I'm going to start doing my thing. And what happened exactly with Nick Temple at Trail Park, Tony would say, I got a movie for you, but Nick's got to cut it.
Mm.
And basically, they would go to that editor for what they do, not just to cut a trailer. I've had that call from John Stanford when he calls us and says, I have a movie for you. I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. So that's a whole different feeling of all of a sudden you're not that afraid to explore artistically. I've sent stuff, some clients are more open to real artistic exploration where I mean, with John, when we did the Birds of Prey, I put, being French, I wanted to put a French song on a DC movie, and we put an Edith Piaf song. I remember I gave it to Maurice, said, really? I said, yeah, really. And John loved it,
That's great.
so there are certainly clients. Um, I know this girl, Ali Feinstein at Netflix. I see some of her work, the stuff she did on Stranger Things and Wednesday. It's really creative. So there are clients that I can see are really willing to go the extra mile and go, I know this is really kind of weird and crazy, but it might just work. And hopefully, I mean, there's so much at stake now. It's hard for the studios to make a decision to, pull out a piece that's really out there.
One of the coolest things about doing this program is I get to collaborate with friends of mine, not just friends, but friends who are the best at what they do, like my pal Brent Allen Hagel, Trailer VO Brent. Brent, how you doing, man?
Wonderful, Corey. And I think, critics and audiences would agree to that.
So, do Trailer VO guys always talk that way, or do you ever break character?
Would never break character. Cocktail parties, they say, hey, can you do the voice thing for us while they all drink a beer?
Do you do the voice thing while you're drinking a beer?
I've never tried. I could probably win an award for that.
Oh, see, you're already breaking character, man. If we go on too long, you're going to start sounding like Gilbert Gottfried or something.
It'll be like this. Hey, yeah, it was the podcast that did it to me. Even.
All right. So before we hit it, we get back to the show. How can folks find you?
BrentAllenHagel.com, Brent, Allen, Hagel, Hagel.com on the interwebs and social media at Trailer VO Brent on social media.
It's a great follow. Thanks, Brent, and thanks for helping out. And now back to our show. When I look at a body of work like yours that goes back to, the late 70s, the 80s, it's important to contextualize some of the choices that were being made. So, for example, when I was looking at the original Top Gun trailer, because that's another one that you circled back around to, right? The way that you intercut the dialogue with the action without the VO, I was wondering if was VO really heavily used at that time? So was that
Yes.
was that method, was that kind of new? Was that different than what was being done?
Yeah, that was the whole thing. There was a real formula with the VO, and in the early days they had VO with the big cars. It's now on the screen, But
Yeah.
certainly during the late 70s and early 80s, there was always VO. There was it was part of the package, right?
Right.
And I started I started saying, okay, you know what? I want to do shit that's different. The dialogue is going to be the thread of the story. It won't be the narration threading everything. The music and the dialogue are going to drive the piece.
Yeah.
Top Gun was a blast, and that was my first collaboration with Tony Scott, who was just a dream to work with.
Oh, that's right. And Tony, didn't he do the Beverly Hills Cop
He did
2?
Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Right, right, right. There were a lot of
Uh,
filmmakers that you have this long collaboration with. That's
yeah.
that, but were the industry was a very different industry at the time. So was that happening? Because I know that Steve and Andy had developed relationships with filmmakers, but I wasn't aware that the editors had begun to do that as well.
Well, that's the funny thing is that, when you started working with these, you have to remember at the time there were 5 companies in the whole country. So there were not really many places for people to go. And Steve and Andy had, I always thought Kaleidoscope was the Rolls Royce of the company, although Canoe in New York was a great competitor and they did great work. Um, but what happened is that when you started collaborating with these filmmakers, when you were able to come up with stuff that really jazzed them, they wanted to continue working with you. So they would say, I have another try. I want Benedict to cut this. I want Benedict to cut. I was basically coming up with stuff that they would respond to and goes, wow, this is really cool. So Steve and Andy were just kind of enjoying the ride and just to say, yeah, of course you can work with Benedict. He's
Mm,
available. Um, and that was the same thing that developed with all these different filmmakers that I worked with. I mean, I don't know if it's as much prevalent these days because I don't think editors have as much access to the filmmakers as we did then because they had to come to the cutting room to watch the cut on the
mm,
movie.
right, right. So there was that was quite a chapter for you. 15, not 50, it was longer than 15 years of Kaleidoscope, wasn't it?
17 years.
17 years.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just your career, it was actually the whole industry had really changed. Can you reflect a little bit about that? Because you mentioned that there were only 5. So Aspect Ratio, Canoe and Company, Kaleidoscope, was
Cimarron.
Cimarron was
And
already
it
around?
was also Interlink and Tony Seiniger.
Right, right,
And then Canoe in New York. So that
right.
was, but Aspect was later. They were a new company.
Yeah, yeah. So can you reflect a little bit about certainly through the 80s and into the early 90s, how different of an industry was it that you entered into in the late 70s that then you started to chart a new course in the early 90s? How different, like how did share with us a little bit on your perspective of how the industry evolved during those 17 years?
Well, it didn't actually change that much during those years at Kaleidoscope, except for the technology. You know, we went from film to tape, which I hated, because um, if you made changes on a trailer on tape, you had to dub down from where you were making your changes to add your changes, and you would lose quality. It would sound. There was a hiss on it, so I would spend hours rebuilding everything on tape. I hated it. And then at some point, somebody came and said, "Oh my God, you got to come this afternoon. There's a presentation. This company called Avid came up with nonlinear editing." And I said, "What's nonlinear editing?" Well, you can actually insert a shot. You don't have to push everything back. You actually put a shot in the middle. Um, so we all went down and looked at it, and they had these giant drives. They were I forgot, they were like 20 gigabytes or something. So they were only 2 tracks. So you had to figure out to put everything on one track and everything on the other. You couldn't put a full feature on it because there's not enough storage. So you had to make selects. So there was definitely an evolution in the equipment that we used. As far as the competition in the companies, you know, it still wasn't that much because there was so many movies being made. There was enough for everybody. We were all busy. Um, there was a little bit of competition. I remember competing with Canoe on a few things. But it didn't feel that different. I mean, I was kind of entrenched in the work that I was doing. And um, the wonderful thing about it, and my main 2 clients were Joel Wayne and Nancy Gallagher. When I left Kaleidoscope, my reel was half Joel, half Nancy.
Wow.
Uh, she gave me every movie she had. It was just incredible, and so did he. Um, so I was constantly busy, and the great thing is that there were, rarely did you go against another company.
So
They
when
went, they went to one vendor that they stayed with that vendor all the way through.
you were still editing full time when you went from Kaleidoscope to Aspect.
Oh yeah, I'm still
Okay.
editing now, Corey.
I
I
know.
never, I never stopped editing.
So when were you on Avid by the time you had made that move, or were you still on?
To Aspect.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And
And
also,
Aspect had also Lightworks, which was like this
oh, that's
weird thing with
funny.
a shark and all that. But
Yeah,
I was
there were
yeah,
still a couple Lightworks around when I got into the
yeah,
business
yeah, yeah,
in like
yeah, yeah.
2000.
Yeah.
So
So when I left Kaleidoscope to go to Aspect, we were on Avid.
was Skip Chassan already at the at Kaleidoscope when you left, or
No, no,
he came a little later?
he came a little later. Um, I think that uh, when I left, it might have been a year and a half. They moved to another building on Wilshire. And I think they were still struggling to find another editor that had kind of the crazy cool stuff that I was doing. They had conventional editors, but they didn't have the guy that does the stuff that filmmakers are really responding to. And then, Steve got Skip, who just completely changed the
Changed the
entire
game.
game.
He
Changed the
really
game.
dug into Avid and to find things that it could do that nobody else was really trying at that point. But he also had these other sensibilities from from being a comics book guy and a rock and roll guy, just
Yeah,
so
I
just
mean,
like you had brought in
he
those
blew
different
all of us
sensibilities.
away. He blew all of us away with his
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
We're like, what the hell is this?
You,
And it was brilliant.
Yeah, I'm realizing that I mean, we haven't even gotten to the aspect chapter, let alone the trailer park chapter. So I want to make sure that we leave enough time for that. We're going to do
Yes,
that, if you will.
yes.
Come back and we'll do part two because there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, trailer park, obviously, your time now at Rebel and your mentoring. But also, I have a lot of questions about the brilliant kid. There's so much to
Oh,
talk about
yes.
there. But
Yeah.
before we go, I'm gonna put you a little bit on the spot. We will jump forward to the present, and I'll ask you. Well, actually, it encompasses all of trailers, the history of trailers. Any favorite campaigns that come to mind that you did? Maybe you worked on them, but maybe didn't necessarily work, or you just looked at them and wow, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah, listen, I mean, we voted I think a couple of years ago, a bunch of us got to vote on the best trailers, and Alien will
Yeah.
always be the pole bearer for all of us of like, wow, just how this was constructed at that time, visually and sound wise was brilliant. But the another trailer that really got my attention with Little Children because of the sound design and the choices of the train expressing a certain feeling, I thought was just brilliant. But there were other campaigns, um, Social Network and Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. I just like to see things that was, that was very creative and very inventive. But that said, the latest trailer they did on Mission Impossible, I thought was really majestic and beautifully done. So,
Mm,
I tell you something. Haven't been in the business 47 years, 48 years now. Um, I marvel at what people are coming up with, this new generation and all these editors and all these companies. Like, it's incredible how this business has changed and the creativity that is, shown all around these pieces. It's just incredible.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have to tell Chad Meisner that
Oh yeah,
two of it
love
that's two of
Chad.
his pieces that you came
Yeah,
right at,
yeah.
right at the top of your
Brilliant
list.
editor. Brilliant editor.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we hit pause on this to part one, do you have any questions for me?
Um, yeah, I'm just curious how, you obviously, we had our little jabs back and forth. How are you able to kind of navigate, I can see and I know that you love the business, but how do you navigate with people like me who give you shit and say, you're a headhunter and it's hard for us as business people to deal with headhunters when we're trying to grow. are you able to separate that?
So I'm so glad you asked. First of all, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Benny. Like when you reached out and we got together, it's one of the most meaningful things in my life to be able to. Eh, there are certain people who I've remained very close with and have had no conflicts with, believe it or not, and that's great. It's wonderful to go through life with people and you just share experiences and the ups and downs of life. Then there are some people that you inevitably have a conflict with, very smart, ambitious, creative, talented people. Inevitably, there are going to be some conflicts. But when when someone comes in goodwill and says, "Hey, man, I think we had some differences there. Let's see if we could figure it out." Sometimes you can't figure it out, but then
Mhm.
sometimes you can. I'm getting chills just thinking about it, man. Like it's so meaningful to me to be able to um, look each other in the eye and say, "Hey, this is what I was thinking, and this is why it hurt," um, and to give each other that time and that space, and that and see each other's humanity.
Mhm.
So it makes it really that much sweeter to have gone through that. As far as the business goes, the way that I've navigated is I always keep in mind the possibility that I'm going to be in the room with somebody else that's involved with this deal. Whether they're my adversary, I don't see people as my adversary necessarily, but I also understand that when I've placed people, it means that they're leaving somewhere else.
Mhm.
So I keep in mind, and Farina, I love Farina, but Farina was always the one that I had in mind. Can I be in the room with Farina and look him in the eye and say, Bob, this is what I did. This is how I did it. This is why I did it. Or Smitty was another one. If I can look him in the eye and say, I did it with integrity. I didn't break anybody out of contracts. I didn't
Mhm.
even, try to convince somebody who was perfectly happy with just throwing some extra money in their face. So I tried to do it with integrity and an extra layer of that so that if I was in the room with somebody, I could look them in the eye. And if they still disagreed with it and were still pissed off at me, that's cool. It's their prerogative. But I needed to make sure that I was doing it right on my end. And the good news is, at least for me, is that I have been in the room with a lot of those guys, and they have given me the opportunity to say what my thinking was, and that's been really cool too.
Yeah, and I've heard it through a lot of your podcasts where I mean, with Ron and Jeff, and you've had,
Jeff was funny, yeah.
yeah, you've had the talks, so
Yeah, Jeff was great, but like I said, it really is it is meaningful, and it makes this part of what I do that much more special to be because at the end of the day, I love the business, I love the work, I love the people, I love the history of the business. So to be able to participate in telling the story, it's great, man. It's a thrill of a lifetime. So. And I really appreciate you jumping in. We got some more to talk about here as I've teased it. Did I do a good job at doing the
yes,
teaser
you
for
did.
it?
Great job.
That's
Great
terrific.
announcement.
Before we go, how can folks find? You have so much great content online, especially your LinkedIn, but also the work that's coming out of Rebel is fantastic. How can folks find you online and get more information about all the great work that you're doing?
We're just at rebelav.com, and my other company, The Brilliant Kid, is just a brilliant kid, and we're on YouTube and online, so and on Apple.
Love that stuff. Love that stuff. I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that and everybody hearing Pam Levine's voice and all the great work that you're doing there.
Yes,
So we'll
yes.
talk more about that, the trailer park years and Rebel and your mentoring. That's to come real soon. But for now, make sure you rate us, review us wherever you get your podcast. It really helps us in the rankings. And follow us on all the socials. I am at Corey S. Nathan, Coreys as in Sam, Nathan. Check out our awesome sponsors, our friends at the Golden Trailers. Also sponsored by Brent Allen Hagel, Trailer VO Brent. And we are brought to you by Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes presents Seen on the Screen. Really grateful to all those folks for helping us keep the lights on. Thanks again for joining us. Now go do some inspired work.